Welcome to the Rebel City Drama Club's production of Anne Rand's play, The Night of January 16th. We appreciate that you are able to tune in and join us no matter where you are in the world. This grand theatrical experiment of using Zoom to produce, record, edit, and present this play has been frustrating at times. But at the same time, it's been grand fun to do during COVID throughout this arduous lockdown here in Ireland. The technical challenges of the various levels of IT experience, using the internet, using different devices, laptops, desktops, smartphones, tablets, along with navigating Zoom itself, has been an enriching experience for the whole cast. And we chose this play for many reasons. It's a great story. It has a large cast, allowing more involvement for our members. But foremost, it has a static set, a courtroom in New York City. Thus, no scene changes, making it perfect for Zoom. And the story, it's a simple one. A man, Bjorn Faulkner, was murdered on the night of January 16th. Or was it suicide? Telling the story over Zoom has allowed us to make an unusual twist to your viewing pleasure. You decide how the story ends. For you, the viewers, are the jury. Once all the evidence has been given, you will be asked to give your verdict. So please remember to cast your vote when prompted. So now it's time to sit back, relax, and listen very carefully to the evidence. See you in court.
Court attention. Superior Court number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilhelmina Heath presiding.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are the jurors who will try this case. At the close, you will be asked to vote upon your verdict. Therefore, I instruct you to listen to the testimony very carefully and pronounce your judgment to the very best of your ability and integrity. You are to determine whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty, and her fate rests in your hands. The district attorney may now proceed.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. On the night of the 16th of January, near midnight, when the lights of Broadway blazed an electric dawn to the gay crowd below, the body of a man came hurtling through space and crashed, a disfigured mess, at the foot of the Faulkner building. That body had been Sweden's great financier, Bjorn Faulkner. He fell 50 stories from his luxurious penthouse suicide, we were told. A great man, unwilling to bend before his imminent ruin. A man that found the fall from a skyscraper shorter and easier than a descent from his tottering throne of the world's financial dictator. Only a few months ago, behind every transaction of gold in the world, stood this man, young, tall, with an arrogant smile, with kingdoms and nations in one hand and a whip in the other. If gold is the world's lifeblood, then Bjorn Faulkner, regulating its ebb and flow, its every pulsation, holding all its dark, hidden arteries, was the lifeblood of the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the world has just had a heart attack. And like all heart attacks, it was rather sudden. No one knew the gigantic swindle that lay at the foundation of the Faulkner's enterprise. Days after, thousands of investors were shook by the paralysis which follows such an attack when this monstrous heart stopped beating. Bjorn Faulkner had had a hard struggle facing the world, but he had an even harder struggle facing his own heart. 2 women ruled his life and death. Here is one of them, ladies and gentlemen. Karen Andre, Bjorn's efficient secretary and notorious mistress. But 6 months ago, Faulkner came to America to get a loan to save his fortune. But fate sent him a means to save his own heart in the person who is now his widow, Nancy Lee Faulkner, daughter of John Graham Whitfield, our great philanthropist. Faulkner thought he had found salvation in a new life in the virtuous innocence of his young bride. And the best proof of that is 2 weeks after his wedding, he dismissed Karen Andre. He was through with her. But, ladies and gentlemen, one is not so easily through with a woman like Karen Andre. God knows what revenge and hatred smoldered in her heart, but they leaped into flame on the night of January the 16th. The same delicate hands which raised Bjorn Faulkner high above the world pushed him down to crash into a pavement as cold as this woman's heart. This is what this trial is going to prove. Our first witness will be Dr. Kirkland.
Dr. Kirkland, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Kindly state your name.
Dr. Thomasina Kirkland,
What is your occupation?
medical examiner of this county.
What were you called to do on the night of January the 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner.
What did you establish as the cause of death?
A fall from a great height.
How long had Faulkner been dead when you examined the body?
I arrived half an hour after the fall.
And judging from the condition of the body, could you tell how long it had been dead?
No, I could not. Due to the extreme conditions and the cold, the blood had coagulated immediately. This gave a difference of 7 hours, making it impossible to determine.
Therefore, Faulkner could have been dead longer than half an hour.
It is possible.
Could his death have been caused by anything other than this fall?
I found no evidence of it.
For instance, had his skull been smashed before the fall? Would you be able to tell by examining the body?
No, I could not. Owing to the extreme conditions of the body, it would have been impossible to determine.
Thank you, Dr. Kirkland. That is all.
Did you find any trace of any such earlier wound in your examination of the body, Dr. Kirkland?
No, I did not.
Did you find any indication that death might have been caused by anything other than the fall?
No, I did not.
That is all.
John Hutchins. John Hutchins,
Yes, ma'am.
do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
What is your name?
John Joseph Hutchins.
What is your occupation?
I'm the night watchman at the Faulkner building, ma'am.
Had Faulkner business offices in that building?
Yes, ma'am.
Who owned the penthouse at the top of the building?
Mr. Faulkner did, ma'am.
Who lived there?
Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre, ma'am. That is before Mr. Faulkner's marriage.
And after the marriage?
After the marriage, Miss Andre lived there, alone.
Have you ever seen Mr. Faulkner call on Miss Andre after his marriage?
Only the once, ma'am.
When was that?
On the night of January 16th.
Tell us about it, Mr. Hutchins.
Well, it was about 10:30, and
How do you know the time?
I start duty at 10, ma'am, and it was no more than a half hour after. The entrance doorbell rang, so I went down to the lobby and I opened the door. It was Miss Andre, and Mr. Faulkner was with her. I was surprised at the time because Miss Andre has her own key, and usually she opens the door herself.
Was she alone with Mr. Faulkner?
No, ma'am, there were 2 other gentlemen with them.
And who were they?
I don't know, ma'am.
Have you ever seen them before?
No, ma'am, never.
What do they look like?
They were tall and sort of slender, both of them. One had light eyes, as I remember. The other one, I couldn't see his face at all because he had his hat down all crooked over his eyes. He must have had a bit too much, ma'am, meaning no disrespect.
What do you mean?
Well, he was a bit tight, ma'am, if I'm permitted to say so. He wasn't very steady on his feet, so that Mr. Faulkner and the other gentleman had to help him. They almost dragged him into the elevator.
Did Mr. Faulkner look worried?
No, ma'am. On the contrary, he seemed very happy.
Did he look like a man contemplating suicide?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Did the others in the party seem happy too?
Yes, ma'am. Miss Andre was smiling, and Mr. Faulkner laughed when they went in the elevator.
Did you see any of them leave that night?
Yes, ma'am. The first one left about 15 minutes later.
Okay, who was that?
The drunk one, man, he came down the elevator all by himself. He didn't seem quite so drunk no more. He could walk, but he staggered a little.
Did you see where he went?
Well, I had wanted to help him to the door, seeing the condition he was in, but he saw me coming and he just hurried out. He got into a car parked right at the entrance, and Diddy step on him, but I don't think he got very far. The cop must have got him.
What makes you think that?
Well, I saw another car behind him that started right after him.
What car?
The
If Miss,
defendant will please keep quiet.
if Miss Andre will allow me to do the questioning, I was just going to ask, which car, Mr. Hutchins?
It was a big black sedan, ma'am.
Who was in it?
I saw only the one man.
Okay. And what makes you think he was after the first car?
Well, I couldn't be sure he was, ma'am. It just looked kind of funny that they started together like that.
Did you see the other guest leaving too?
Yes, ma'am. He left no more than 10 minutes later.
What did he do?
Nothing unusual, ma'am. He seemed to be a hurry. He went right out.
Then what happened?
I started him around the building, and then it must have been an hour later. I heard screams outside in the street. I ran down to the lobby and I saw Miss Andre coming out of the elevator. Her gown was all torn, sobbing wild like. I ran after her. We pushed through the crowd outside, and there was Mr. Faulkner all over the pavement.
That's all, Mr. Hutchins.
You said that you had never seen Mr. Faulkner calling upon Miss Andre after his marriage, with the exception of that night. Now, tell me, do you always see every visitor who comes into the building late at night?
No, sir. I'm not in the lobby all the time. I have my rounds to make. If a guest has their own key, he can come in and I wouldn't see him at all.
In other words, Miss Andre might have had any number of visitors, including Mr. Faulkner, whom you would have never seen come into the building late at night.
Yes, sir, quite right.
That is all.
Homer Van Fleet.
Homer Van Fleet, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Homer Herbert Van Fleet,
What is your occupation?
private investigator,
What was your last assignment?
shadowing Mr. Bjorn Faulkner
By whom were you hired to do that?
by Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
Were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the night of January the 16th?
I was.
Kindly tell us about it.
I'll start with 6:13 p.m.
How do you know the time?
Part of my duties, I recorded and reported back to Mrs. Faulkner.
I see.
6:13 p.m. Mr. Faulkner leaves his home on Long Island. He's wearing formal evening clothes. He drives his car alone. Special notation, unusual speed all the way to New York.
Where does Mr. Faulkner go?
He drives up to the Faulkner building and he goes in. It is now 7:57 p.m. All the offices are closed. I wait outside in my car. At 9:35 p.m., Mr. Faulkner comes out with Miss Andre. Miss Andre is wearing a formal dress. Special notation, Miss Andre is wearing a corsage of orchids of unusual proportions. They drive away.
Where do they go?
No one's perfect in this world.
What do you mean?
I mean, I lost them due to Mr. Faulkner's speed and the accident.
What accident?
My front left fender crashing into a truck. Damages for said fender were charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
What did you do when you lost track of them?
I returned to the Faulkner building and I waited.
When did they return?
It was 10:30 p.m. exactly. They were followed by a gray coupe. Mr. Faulkner gets out. He helps out Miss Andre. While Miss Andre goes to ring the bell, Mr. Faulkner opens the door of the coupe. A tall gentleman wearing formal clothing gets out. Together, they help out a third gentleman. The latter is wearing a dark gray sports coat. Special notation, the aforementioned gentleman is showing signs of inebriation. They all enter the Faulkner building.
Then what did you do?
I get out of my car and I go to Gary's Grill, which is situated just across the road from the Faulkner building. I feel I must explain that I allow myself time for nourishment every 4 hours while I'm on duty. And well, 4 hours had elapsed since we left Long Island. So I found myself a table by a window and I watched the door of the Faulkner building.
What did you observe?
Nothing for 15 minutes. Then the man with the dark gray coat comes out. He gets into the car and starts it up. The coupe, he's obviously in a hurry. He drives away, south.
Did you see the other stranger leave?
Yes, 10 minutes later, he gets into a car that's parked by the curb. I don't know how it got there, but there it was. And he seems to have the keys because he gets in, he starts it up, and he too drives away, south.
Have you ever seen Mr. Faulkner with these two men before?
No, it's the first time I've seen him.
What did you do when they left?
I waited. For you see, Mr. Faulkner is now alone up in the penthouse with Miss Andre, and I'm curious, professionally. Decide to do a bit more investigating. Have a special observation post. Have used it before.
Where is that?
The Sky Top nightclub. It's on the roof of the Brooks building, just 3 doors down from Faulkner's. They've got an open gallery there just off from the dance floor. You go out, and you can see the Faulkner penthouse just as plain as the palm of your hand from there. So I go out, and I look, and I yell.
What do you see?
No lights. Just Karen Andre's white gown shimmering in the moonlight. She's hoisting up a man's body onto the parapet. A man in evening clothes. It's Faulkner. He's unconscious. There's no resistance. With all her strength, she pushes the body over the edge of the parapet, and it goes down into space.
Then what did you do?
I run backside into the dining room and I yell about what I've seen. A large crowd follows me down to the Faulkner building, and it's there that we find a bloody mess on the pavement and Karen Andre sobbing over it, fit to move a first night audience.
Did you speak to her?
No, the police had arrived, so I report what I've seen, same as I've done here today.
You're a witness.
Mr. Van Fleet, can you kindly tell us, when did you start in the employ of Mrs. Faulkner?
October 13th last.
Can you tell us the date of Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner's wedding?
It was October 12th, the day before.
Exactly. Just the day before. In other words, Mrs. Faulkner hired you to spy on her husband the day after their wedding.
So it seems.
What was Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you when you were hired?
To record the every action of Mr. Faulkner and report back in detail.
Any special attention to Miss Andre?
Not specified.
Had Mr. Faulkner been calling to Miss Andre after his wedding?
Yes, frequently.
In the daytime?
Seldom.
Did you report such facts to Mrs. Faulkner?
I did.
What was Mrs. Faulkner's reactions to those reports?
Mrs. Faulkner is a lady, and as such, she had no reactions.
Did she seem worried?
I don't believe so. Mr. Faulkner is the most devoted of husbands, and he loved his wife dearly.
Just how do you know that?
Those were Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Now, Mr. Van Fleet, can you kindly tell us exactly what time you started for the Skytop building on the night of January 16th?
11:32 p.m.
How long a walk is it from the Faulkner building to the Skytop?
3 minutes.
How long did it take you to get to the balcony at the Skytop?
11:57 p.m.
Exactly. So it took you 25 minutes to get out onto the balcony. What were you doing the rest of the time?
Of course, they have a dance floor up in the Skytop, amongst other things.
And did you take advantage of these other things?
I had a couple of drinks, if I catch a drift of your curiosity, but that doesn't mean that you can say that I was intoxicated.
I have said nothing of the kind as yet. Now, let me see. You saw Miss Andre pushing Mr. Faulkner off the rooftop in the darkness at a little distance. And you, as we shall say, you just had a couple of drinks.
The drinks had nothing to do with it.
Are you certain that she was pushing him off the roof? Isn't it possible that she was struggling with him?
Well, it's a funny way of struggling. I mean, if I was hoisting up a man, I wouldn't be hoisting him up on me.
Mr. Van Fleet, what were your instructions before you came here to testify today?
I received no such instructions, and I may inform you that Mrs. Faulkner is not here to instruct me where she inclined to do so. She was taken to California by her father to rest her shattered nerves.
Mr. Van Fleet, do you think that Mr. Faulkner's suicide is flattering to Mrs. Faulkner?
We object.
Objection sustained.
Mr. Van Fleet, how much do you think it is worth to a witness to Mrs. Faulkner?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
I'd like to remind Mr. Stevens that he may be sued for making insinuations such as these.
I made no insinuations. I merely asked a question in a general way.
Well, I may like to inform you in a general way. The perjury is not part of a private investigator's duties.
No special notations to the rule.
None.
That's all, Mr. Van Fleet.
No, quiet. I want you to ask him 2 more questions, Stephen.
Judge?
Certainly, Miss Andre. What are the questions? Ah, what kind of car do you drive, Mr. Van Fleet?
So, brown Buick Coupe. It's last year's model. Old, but serviceable.
Did you see anyone following the gentleman in the gray coat when he left the penthouse apartment that night?
Not that I can recall. The traffic was quite heavy at the time.
That is all, Mr. Van Fleet.
Inspector Sweeney?
Inspector Sweeney, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Elmer Sweeney,
What is your occupation?
Inspector of Police, NYPD, New York's finest.
On the 16th of January, were you called upon to investigate Bjorn Faulkner's death?
Yes, ma'am. I was one of the first officers to reach the spot.
Did you question Miss Andre also?
Not right away. Before I could do anything, that fellow Van Fleet rushed up to me and yelled that he had seen Karen Andre throw Faulkner off the roof.
How did Miss Andre react to this?
She was stunned. She stood there, eyes wide, fit to burst. And then, cross my heart, ma'am, she started laughing. I thought she'd went crazy.
What did you do?
I ordered her held for questioning, and we took her up with us in the elevator to examine the penthouse. What a joint!
Did you find anything unusual in the penthouse?
Unusual? Yes, ma'am, the bedroom.
What did you find in the bedroom?
Nightgowns, ma'am. Lace nightgowns, just about made of thin air. A crystal bathtub in the bathroom. And when we turned the shower on, the water was perfumed.
You've misunderstood my question, Mr. Sweeney. I was asking, did you find anything unusual in the penthouse that could be connected to Bjorn Faulkner's death?
Yes, ma'am, in the living room.
What did you find?
A letter. It was lying in plain sight on the table. It was sealed and addressed to whomsoever should find it first.
Is this the letter?
Yes, ma'am.
Will you kindly read it to the jury?
If any future historian wants to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say that I found only two enjoyable things on this earth, whose every door was open to me: my whip over the world and Karen Andre. To those who can use it, the advice is worth what it has cost mankind. Bjorn Faulkner.
Submitted as evidence.
Accepted as Exhibit A.
Did you question Miss Andre about the letter?
I did. She said that Faulkner wrote the letter and ordered her not to touch it. Then went out onto the roof garden. She struggled with him when she saw what he was going to do, but she couldn't stop him.
Did you ask her who was with them that night?
I did. She said there were two gentlemen. They were friends of Mr. Faulkner, and she had never seen him before. He picked them up in a nightclub that evening and brought them along. She said their names were Jerry White and Dick Saunders.
Did you find these two men among Mr. Faulkner's acquaintances?
We did. We found that no one had ever heard of him.
And Miss Andre told you, as she did at the inquest, that she had never seen these two men before?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Was she very empathic about that?
Yes, ma'am. Very.
That is all, Inspector.
Now, you said that Miss Andre had told you about her struggle with Mr. Faulkner preventing suicide. Did you notice any evidence of a struggle in her clothing?
Yes, sir. Her dress was torn. She had diamond shoulder straps and one of them was broken. So she had to hold up the dress with one hand.
What did you think of that?
Really? Do I have to answer this?
You certainly do.
Well, I wished he had broken the other strap too.
Oh, Inspector, I meant, did you think that as a result of the struggle that the dress had been torn in such struggle?
It looked like it, yes, sir.
Now, can you tell us why on earth you turn on the shower in the bathroom?
Well, you see, we heard that Faulkner had wine instead of water in it.
Oh, Inspector, you cannot believe all the legends you hear about Bjorn Faulkner. That is all. Thank you, Inspector.
Magda Svensson.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?
I swear.
What is your name?
You know it. You just call me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. Please state your name.
Magda Svensson.
What is your occupation?
I am housekeeper.
By whom were you last employed?
By Herr Bjorn Faulkner. And before that, his father.
How long were you employed by them?
I've been in the family 38 years. I remember Herr Bjorn since he was a little child.
When did you first come to America?
I've been here 5 years.
What were the duties Mr. Faulkner assigned to you?
I keep penthouse for him. He visits every year or so. I stay even after he go when he get married. But I've never been employed by this one.
Now, Mrs. Svensson.
Miss Svensson.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Miss Svensson. What do you know of Miss Andre's relations with Mr. Faulkner?
Oh, decent women like me shouldn't know about such things. But sin is shameless in this world.
Tell us about it, Miss Svensson.
From very first day this woman appeared, she was sleeping with Herr Faulkner. It isn't a good thing when a man forgets the line between his desk and his bed. Sometimes they would talk loans and dividends in bed. Other times the door was locked, and underneath the window shades, which was pulled down, I seen her lace panties on the windowsill.
Your Honor, we object.
I think Miss Andre should have objected many years ago.
Such line of testimony is outrageous.
These are
Silent counsels. I shall ask the witness to word her testimony more carefully.
Sin is sin, any name you call it, Judge.
Miss Svensson, do you know of any instances when Miss Andre's conduct with Mr. Faulkner was detrimental to Mr. Faulkner in other ways than moral?
Oh, I do so. You try counting up all the money he wasted on that woman.
Can you tell us an example of Mr. Faulkner's extravagance?
He had a platinum gown made for her. Yes, I said platinum. Fine mesh, fine and soft as silk. She wore it on her naked body. He would make a fire in the fireplace and heat the dress, and then he would put it on her. And it cooled, and you could see her body in silver sheen. It had been more decent if she had been naked. And she asked to put it on as hot as she could stand it. And if it burned her shameless skin, she laughed like the pagan she is.
Your Honor.
He would kiss the burn, wild like tiger.
Your Honor, we object. Such line of testimony is irrelevant and only tends to prejudice the jury against Miss Andre.
It's okay, Stephen. Perhaps it provided you in my favor.
Mr. Stevens has my sympathy. His client is not an easy one to handle.
Objection overruled.
Did you observe Mr. Faulkner's attitude towards his marriage, Miss Svensson?
He was happy for first time in his life. He was happy like decent man what found right road.
Do you know of anything that would cause him to worry in those days, that would bring him to suicide?
No, nothing.
And did you observe Miss Andre's attitude towards Mr. Faulkner's marriage?
She's silent like stone statue. She...
Mrs. Faulkner!
I understand you wanted to call me as a witness, Miss Flint.
I did, Mrs. Faulkner, but I thought you were in California.
I was. I escaped.
You have my deepest appreciation, Mrs. Faulkner. You escaped?
Father was concerned over my health. He wouldn't allow me to come back. But I want to do my duty toward the memory of my husband. I am at your disposal, Miss Flint.
Again, you have my deepest appreciation, Mrs. Faulkner. If you just take a seat, I'll be with you in just one moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Svensson, you were telling us about Miss Andre's attitude towards Mr. Faulkner's marriage.
Yeah, she's silent, very silent. But one night I hear her crying, sobbing. But that's the first and only time in her life.
Did she seem to suffer much?
Her suffer? No. One more man, more or less, make no difference to her. I've seen her unfaithful to Herr Faulkner the night of his wedding.
Unfaithful with whom?
I don't know the man. I've seen him for the first time the night of Herr Faulkner's wedding.
Tell us about it.
Well, I've gone to the wedding. Oh, it was beautiful. Oh, my poor Herr Bjorn, so handsome. And the young bride, white and lovely as Lily. I cried like looking at my own children. But she not go to wedding.
Did Miss Andre stay at home?
She stay at home. I go back early. I come in servant's door. She not hear me come. She was home, but she was not alone.
Who was with her?
He was, the man, out on a roof in the garden. It was dark, but I could see. He holding her so tight, I think he's going to break her bones. And then he bent her back so far, I think she's going to fall in her reflection in the pool. And then he kissed her, and I think his lips are never going to leave hers.
Did you learn this man's name?
No.
Did you ever see him again?
Yeah, once.
When was that?
The night of January 16th.
Tell us about it.
Well, she very strange that day. She called me and she say, you can take the rest of the day off. And I've been suspicious.
Why did that make you suspicious?
Well, my day off is Thursday, and I not ask for another day. And I say, I not need a day off. And she say, I not need you. So I go.
What time did you go?
About 4 o'clock. But I want to know a secret, so I come back.
What time did you come back?
About 10 o'clock that night. The house is dark. She not home. So I wait. About half an hour later, I hear them coming, and I seen Herr Faulkner with her. So I afraid to stay, but before I go, I seen 2 gentlemen with them. One, he was drunk. I not know him.
Did you know the other one?
The other one, he was tall and lanky and had light eyes. He was the man I seen kissing Miss Andre.
Thank you, Miss Svensson. That is all.
Just a minute, Miss Svensson. You still have a little talk with me.
For what? I say all I know.
You may know the answer to a few more questions. You say that you had seen that stranger kissing Miss Andre?
Yeah, I did.
You said it was dark that night when you saw him for the first time?
Yeah, it was dark.
And on the night of January 16th, when you were so disingenuously spying on your mistress, you said that you saw her come in with Mr. Faulkner and that you had hurried to depart in order not to get caught.
You have a good memory.
You said you just got a swift glance of the 2 gentlemen with them.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what the drunken gentlemen look like?
How can I? It was too dark at the door and no time to see face.
So it was too dark and you were in a hurry. And yet you were able to identify a man whom you had seen but once before?
Let me tell you, mister, I am under oath, as you say, and I'm a religious woman and I respect oath. And I say it was the same man, and that's what I say again.
Thank you. That is all, Miss Svensson.
Mrs. Faulkner.
Mrs. Faulkner, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Nancy Lee Faulkner.
What was your relation to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
I realize this is painful for you, and I really appreciate your courage. But I will need to ask you questions that will awaken sad memories.
I am ready, Miss Flint.
Okay. Where did you first meet Bjorn Faulkner?
At a ball given by my friend Sander van Rensler in Newport.
When did you see Mr. Faulkner again?
In August of last year.
And did you see him often after that?
Well, Sandra introduced us at the ball. I remember she said, "Here's a tough one for you, Nancy. I wonder whether you'll add this scalp to the well-known collection." Sandra had always insisted on exaggerating my popularity. I danced with him that night. We danced in the garden under the trees and stopped on the edge of a pool. We were alone in the darkness with the faint sound of the Blue Danny waltz filling the silence. Mr. Faulkner reached up to pick a rose for me. As he tore it off, his hand brushed my bare shoulder. I don't know why, but I blushed. He noticed it and apologized, graciously, smiling. Then he brought me back to the guests. I think we both felt a silent understanding that night, for we did not dance again with each other.
When did you see him again?
3 days later, I invited him to dine at my Long Island residence. Just an informal little dinner with father as chaperone. It was a real Swedish meal, and I cooked it myself.
Did you see him often after that?
Yes, quite often. His visits became more and more frequent until the day.
Until the day?
The day he proposed to me.
Oh, tell us about it.
We went driving, Mr. Faulkner and I, alone. It was a beautiful day with a bright, cold sunshine. I was driving my car, and I felt so young, so happy that I grew reckless. I'm sorry, it's a little hard for me to think of those days. I was reckless, reckless enough to lose my way. We stopped on a strange country road. I laughed and said, "We're lost. I've kidnapped you and I won't release you." He answered, "The ransom you want is not in circulation." Then suddenly he seized my hand and looking right at me said, "What's the use of pretending? I love you, Nancy."
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you want to be dismissed, we can continue tomorrow.
No, that's all right. I can go on. It was then that I learned of the desperate state of Mr. Faulkner's fortune. He told me that he had to tell me the truth, that he could not ask me to marry him when he had nothing to offer me. But I loved him. So I told him that money had never meant anything to me.
Did Mr. Faulkner seem hopeless about the future when your engagement was announced?
No, not at all. He told me that my faith in him and my courage helped him so much. I told him that it was our duty to save his enterprises, our duty to the world he had wronged, not to ourselves. I made him realize his past mistakes and he was ready to atone for them. We were entering a new life together, a life of unselfish devotion to the service and welfare of others.
Did you remain in New York after the wedding?
Yes, we made our home in my Long Island residence. Mr. Faulkner gave up his New York penthouse.
Did Mr. Faulkner tell you about his relations with Miss Andre?
No, not then. But he did 2 weeks after the wedding. He came to me and said, "Dearest, there was a woman, and I feel I must tell you about her." I said, "I know it. You don't have to say a word if you'd rather not, dear."
What did Mr. Faulkner tell you?
He said, "Karen Andre is the cause and the symbol of my darkest years. I am going to dismiss her."
What did he tell you?
I told him that I understood him and that he was right. "But," I said, "we must not be cruel. Perhaps you can find another position for Miss Andre." He said that he'd provide for her financially, but that he never wanted to see her again.
He therefore dismissed Miss Andre of his own choice.
Miss Flint, there are 2 kinds of women in this world. My kind is never jealous of the other.
What was Mr. Faulkner's business situation like after the marriage?
I'm afraid I don't know much about business. But I do know that Father made a loan, a very large loan, to my husband.
Do you believe it possible that Mr. Faulkner committed suicide?
I think it totally impossible.
Did Mr. Faulkner ever talk about his plans for the future?
We used to dream of the future together, even on the evening before his death. We were sitting by the fire in his study, talking about the years ahead. We knew we would not be wealthy for a long time. We were planning to have a modest little home with a bright kitchen and a little flower garden. We'd be so happy there, just the 2 of us, until we had little ones to take care of.
And that was on the night of January the 15th, the night before Faulkner's death.
Yes.
And what did Faulkner do on the day of January the 16th?
He spent it in town on business as usual. He came home late in the afternoon. He said that he had to attend a business banquet in New York that evening. He did not have dinner at home. He left at about 6 o'clock.
What banquet did he say he was attending?
He did not tell me, and I didn't ask. I made it a point never to interfere in his business.
Did you notice anything peculiar when he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not a thing. He kissed me and said he tried to come home early. I stood at the door and watched him drive away. He waved as his car disappeared in the dark. I stood there for a few minutes, thinking of how happy we were, of what a perfect dream our love had been, like a delicate ideal, like... I didn't realize that our beautiful romance would indirectly, through jealousy, bring about his death.
Honor, we object. Move that be stricken out.
The witness's last statement may go out.
That is all, Mrs. Faulkner.
Will you be able to answer a few more questions now, Mrs. Faulkner?
As many as you wish, Mr. Stevens.
You said that your romance was like a perfect dream, didn't you?
Yes.
A sacred trot that regenerated a soul.
Yes.
A beautiful, uplifting relationship based on mutual trust.
Yes.
Then, why did you hire a detective to spy on your husband?
I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect Mr. Faulkner.
Will you kindly explain that?
Well, you see, some time ago, Mr. Faulkner was threatened by a gangster, Guts Reagan, I believe they call him that. Mr. Faulkner paid it no attention. No one could intimidate him, and he refused to hire a bodyguard. But I was worried. So as soon as we were married, I hired Mr. Van Fleet to watch him. I did it secretly because I knew that Mr. Faulkner would object.
How could a sleuth, following at a distance, protect Mr. Faulkner?
Well, I heard that the underworld has a way of finding out about these things, and I thought they would not attack a man who was constantly watched.
So all Mr. Van Fleet had to do was to watch Mr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone?
Yes.
Not Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre?
Mr. Stevens, that supposition is insulting to me.
I haven't noticed you sparing such insults, Mrs. Faulkner.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stevens. I assure you that was not my intention.
Now, you said that Mr. Faulkner told you that he never wanted to see Miss Andre again?
Yes, he did.
And yet, he called on her after his marriage, often and at night. Your own detective told you that, didn't he?
Yes, I knew it.
How do you explain that?
I cannot explain it. How can I know what blackmail she was holding over his head?
How do you explain that Mr. Faulkner lied to you on that night of January 16th, and then went directly to the home of Miss Andre?
If I could explain that, Mr. Stevens, I might be able to save you the bother of this trial. We would have an explanation of my husband's mysterious death. All I know is that he went to her home for some reason which he could not tell me, and that he was found dead that night.
Mrs. Faulkner, I want you to answer one more question.
Yes.
I want you to state here on oath that Bjorn Faulkner loved you.
Bjorn Faulkner was mine.
That is all.
No, that's not all. Ask her one more question, Stephen.
What is it, Miss Andre?
Ask her whether she loved him.
I did, Miss Andre.
Then how can you speak about him as you did? How can you sit here and lie? Lie about him when he cannot come back to defend himself.
Objection!
I won't stand for it. I won't sit here and be questioned by
Objection!
the murderers of my husband.
Objection!
I am so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner.
The court will now adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
One of us is lying, and we will know which one is it.
No one to talk with, all by myself. No one to walk with, but I'm happy on the shelf. Ain't misbehaving, saving my love for you, for you, for you, for you. I know for certain the one I love. I'm through with flirting, it's you that I'm thinking of. Ain't misbehaving, saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in the corner, don't go nowhere. What do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for. Believe me, I don't stay out. Well, thank you. No place to go. I'm on my I don't stay up late, got no place to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Hey, misbehaving, saving my love for you.
When I was a kid, about 3:30, my mom said, "Daughter, come here to me." Says things may come and things may go, but this is one thing you ought to know. Oh, tain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. Tain't what you do, it's the time that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the time that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the time that you do it. That's what gets results. You can try hard, don't mean a thing. Take it easy, breezy, then your jab will swing. Oh, it ain't what you do, it's the place that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the time that you do it. Tain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. You've learned your ABCs, you've learned your DFGs, but this is something you don't learn in school. So get your hip boots
Court attention. Superior Court number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilhelmina Heath presiding.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor.
The district attorney may proceed.
If Your Honor, please, the prosecution has one more witness to introduce, Mr. John Graham Whitfield.
John Graham Whitfield. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
John Graham Whitfield.
What is your occupation?
I am the president of Whitfield National Bank.
Were you related to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his father-in-law.
It is obvious, Mr. Whitfield, that you are well qualified to pass judgment on financial matters. May you tell us the state of Mr. Faulkner's business at the time preceding his death, please?
I shall say it was desperate, but not hopeless. my bank made a loan of $25 million to Mr. Faulkner in order to save his enterprises. Needless to say, that money is lost.
What prompted you to make that loan, Mr. Whitfield?
He's the husband of my only daughter. Her happiness has always been paramount to me, but my motives were not entirely personal. Realizing the countless tragedies of small investors that the crash would bring, I felt it was my duty to make every effort possible to prevent it.
Now, would you risk such a considerable sum had Mr. Faulkner's business been so helplessly destined to crash?
Certainly not. It was a difficult undertaking, but my business acumen would have prevented that crash had Mr. Faulkner lived.
Mr. Faulkner, therefore, had no reason to commit suicide as far as his business affairs were concerned.
No, he had every reason for remaining alive.
Now, tell us, Mr. Whitfield, was Mr. Faulkner happy in his relations in his family, in his relations with your daughter?
Miss Flint, I would like to state that I've always regarded the home and the family as our most important institution of our lives. You'll believe me when I tell you that it was so important to me of my daughter's family happiness. And she found perfect happiness with Mr. Faulkner.
Now, what was your opinion of Mr. Faulkner?
Well, it's only fair to admit that he had many qualities of which I did not approve. We were as different as two human beings could possibly be. I believe in one's duty above all. All that Bjorn Faulkner believed in was nothing but his own personal pleasure.
From your knowledge of Mr. Faulkner, do you believe it possible that he committed suicide?
Oh, I consider it absolutely impossible.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That is all.
Mr. Whitfield, were you very fond of your son-in-law?
Yes.
And you never disagreed with him? You never lost your temper in a quarrel?
Mr. Stevens, I never lose my temper.
If my memory serves me right, wasn't there some trouble around the time that you made that stupendous loan to Mr. Faulkner? Something around the fact that you denied making that loan?
Oh, purely a misunderstanding, I assure you. I must admit that Mr. Faulkner made a somewhat unethical attempt to hasten that loan, which was quite unnecessary since I gladly provided it for my daughter's sake.
You said that your personal fortune has been damaged by the Faulkner crash.
Yes.
And that your financial situation is rather strained at present.
Yes.
Then how could you afford to offer a $50,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of Guts Reagan?
Objection! What has this got to do with the case?
Your Honor, I would like the privilege of explaining this.
Very well, I will allow it.
Thank you. I did offer such a reward. I was prompted by a feeling of civic duty. The gentleman, commonly known as Guts Reagan, is a notorious criminal. I offered that reward for evidence that would make his arrest and conviction possible. However, I agree with Miss Flint. This has nothing to do with the present case.
Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us why you left for California in such a hurry before the beginning of this trial?
I think that answer is obvious. My daughter was crushed by the sudden tragedy. I hastened away to save her health and perhaps her life.
You love your daughter profoundly.
Yes.
You have always made it a point that her every wish should be granted.
I proudly say yes.
When she or you desire anything, you don't stop at the price, do you?
We don't have to.
Then would you refuse her the man that she wanted?
Your Honor.
Mr. Stevens.
You wouldn't stop at the first of your personal fortune to break the first unbreakable man you'd ever met.
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Whitfield, are you going to tell us that your money had nothing to do with Mr. Faulkner dismissing Miss Andre, that no ultimatum had been issued to him?
You are quite mistaken with your insinuations. My daughter was no more jealous of Miss Andre than she would be of Mr. Faulkner's soiled underwear. All men have some at one point or another.
I'd be very careful of such statements, Mr. Whitfield. Remember that your daughter paid for what Karen Andre got free.
Your Honor!
Why? You goddamn impudent. Do you know who I am? Do you know that I could crush you like a cockroach as I've crushed many of better?
That is just what I wanted to prove. Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That is all.
Your Honor, we demand that the defense counsel's outrageous remark, which led to this incident, be stricken out.
That remark may go out.
The people rest.
Move that the case be dismissed for lack of evidence.
Denied.
Exception. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot pass judgment on Karen Andre without passing it on Bjorn Faulkner. He was above all present standards. Whether it was below or above them is a question that each of you have to answer personally. Now, I'll ask you this. Remember, he was the man that said there was no need for justifications. He was the justification. He was the man that said that laws were made for the fun of breaking them. Now, I'll ask you to remember, if you understand that in the last few months of his life, that it was as impossible to him as that of a tiger in a vegetarian cafeteria. And to escape it, he was driven to the most desperate means, including suicide. Our first witness will be Mr. James Chandler.
James Chandler, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Your name?
James Chandler.
Your occupation?
Handwriting expert with the New York Police Department.
Do you recognize this letter?
Yes. This is the letter that was found in Mr. Faulkner's penthouse the night of his death. I have been called upon to examine this.
What were you asked to determine?
I was asked to determine whether this was written by Bjorn Faulkner.
What is your verdict?
This letter was written by Bjorn Faulkner.
Your witness.
Mr. Chandler, it has been called to your attention during the inquest that Miss Andre was in the habit of signing her name to unimportant documents. Have you compared these signatures with Faulkner's real ones?
I have.
Well, what is your opinion of them?
I can compliment Miss Andre on her art. The difference is very slight.
Thus, is it possible that she could have forged this letter so perfectly as to escape detection?
It is not probable, but it is possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. That is all.
Sigurd Youngquist.
Sigurd Youngquist. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Sigurd Youngquist.
What is your occupation?
I was secretary for Herr Bjorn Faulkner.
How long have you held that job?
Since the beginning of November, since Miss Andre left.
What was your position before that?
I was bookkeeper for Herr Faulkner.
How long did you hold that job?
8 years.
Did Mr. Faulkner hire you after he dismissed Miss Andre?
Yes.
Did Miss Andre instruct you in your new duties?
Yes, she did.
What was her behavior at that time? Did she seem angry, sorry, resentful?
No, she seemed very calm, and she explained everything to me very clearly.
Did you notice any trouble between Miss Andre and Mr. Faulkner at that time?
Here, lawyer, there can be no trouble between Miss Andre and Herr Faulkner than between you and your face in the mirror.
Did you witness any business conferences between Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Whitfield?
I haven't been present at the conferences, but I've seen Herr Whitfield come into office many times, and Herr Whitfield, he not like Herr Faulkner.
What makes you think that?
Well, I did hear one day that Herr Faulkner was very desperate for money, and Herr Whitfield jokingly said, what would he do if his business clashed? And then Herr Faulkner just said, oh, I'll commit suicide. And Herr Whitfield, he said very strangely and very coldly said, if you do that, we should do a good job at it.
If Your Honor, I would like to report this incident, which I consider as a hoax, and to which I would like to presume further. A gentleman has just called to the office and insisted on speaking to me immediately. When informed that it was impossible to do so, he insisted and left this message, which has just been brought to me. Reads, do not put Karen Andre on the stand until I get there. No signature.
I want to understand right away.
May I ask why, Miss Andre?
Question me now, Stephen.
I'm afraid it's impossible, Miss Andre. We have to finish the questioning of Mr. Youngquist first.
Then Harry,
I shall ask the defendant to refrain from further interruptions.
Now, Mr. Youngquist, where were you on the night of January 16th?
I was in the Faulkner building. I was working. I was working very late for many nights.
What did you do when you heard of Mr. Faulkner's death?
Well, I wanted to call here Whitfield, so I telephoned his home in Long Island, but his butler said he's not home. So I called his office in town, but no answer. No answer from here Whitfield anywhere. So I had to tell Miss Faulkner that here Faulkner committed suicide.
And when you told her that, what were Mrs. Faulkner's first words?
She said, for God's sake, don't give it to the newspapers.
That is all. Thank you, Mr. Youngquist.
Just one moment, Miss Andre, please. Where are you going? Why such a hurry? Whom are you expecting? Mr. Youngquist, you have been employed by Bjorn Faulkner for over 8 years, haven't you?
Yes.
Did you know during that time how crooked and criminal your boss's operations were?
No, I did not.
You did not know that your boss was a criminal and a swindler?
No, I did not know that.
You didn't, eh? And you never knew what any of those brilliant financial operations of his were?
I knew that here Faulkner did what other people were not allowed to do. But I never wonder, never doubt.
How did you know that?
Because he was here beyond Faulkner.
And he could do no wrong?
Flo Lawyer, when little people like you meet a man like here beyond Vodka, we just take our hats off and we bow and we take orders. We do not ask questions.
Splendid, my dear Mr. Youngquist. Your admiration for your master is admirable. You would do anything for him, wouldn't you?
We object, Your Honor.
I have not lied, Flo Lawyer. Beyond Faulkner is dead. You cannot tell me to lie. But if I had to choose, I would lie for here beyond Faulkner, rather than tell the truth to you.
For which statement, Mr. Youngquist, I am more grateful than you can guess. Thank you, Mr. Youngquist. That is all.
Karen Andre.
Karen Andre, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
That's useless. I'm an atheist.
The witness has to affirm regardless.
I affirm.
What is your name?
Karen Andre.
What was your last position?
Secretary to Bjorn Faulkner.
How long have you held that position?
10 years.
Tell us about your first meeting with Mr. Faulkner.
I answered his advertisement for a stenographer. I saw him for the first time in his office on an obscure side street of Stockholm. he was alone. It was my first job, and it was his first office.
How did Faulkner meet you?
He got up and didn't say a word, just stood and looked at me. His mouth was insulting even when silent. You couldn't stand his gaze very long. I didn't know whether I wanted to kneel or slap his face. I didn't do either. I just told him what I had come for.
Did he hire you then?
Well, he told me I was too young and he didn't like me, but then he threw a stenographer pad at me and told me to get down to work because he was in a hurry, so I did.
And you worked all day?
All day. He dictated as fast, faster than he could talk. He didn't give me time to say a word. He didn't smile once, and he never took his eyes off me.
When did he first?
When did he first take me? That first day I met him.
How did that happen?
He seemed to take a delight in giving me orders. He acted as if he were cracking a whip over an animal he wanted to break. And I was afraid.
Because you didn't like that.
Because I like it. So when I finished my 8 hours, I told him I was quitting. He looked at me and didn't answer. Then he asked me suddenly if I had ever belonged to a man. And I said, no, I hadn't. He says that he'd give me 1,000 kroner if I will go into the inner office and take my skirt off. And I said, I wouldn't. Then he said that if I didn't, he'd take me. So I said, okay, try it. And he did. And after a while, I picked up my clothes, but I didn't go. I stayed. So I kept the job.
And you worked and you lived and you rose together in success ever since.
For 10 years. When we made our first million kroner, he took me to Vienna. And we sat on a restaurant where the orchestra was playing Sing Gypsy. When we made our 10 million, he took me to Delhi. And we stood on the shore of the Ganges, on the steps of the old temples, where human slaves had been sacrificed to God. And when we made 25 million, he took me to New York. We had a pilot to fly a plane above the city. And the wind waves beyond her as a banner over the wall at his feet.
What was the extent of Mr. Faulkner's personal fortune at the height of his success?
Well, he couldn't tell you himself, like he had no personal fortune. He took what he wanted. When he owed money to one of his companies, it was closed off the books and debited to the accounts, to the other severance concerns. It was very simple. We prepared all the balance sheet ourselves.
Why did a man of Mr. Faulkner's genius resort to such methods?
He wanted to build a gigantic net and build it fast, a net over the world, and held in his own hand. He had to draw unlimited sums of money. He had to establish his credit. So he paid dividends out of his capital, dividend much higher than we actually earned.
When did Mr. Faulkner's business difficulties first start?
Over a year ago.
What brought Mr. Faulkner to America this time?
A short-term loan of $10 million from the Whitfield National Bank was due, and we couldn't meet it. So we had to have an extension. Whitfield refused it until his daughter came into the question.
How did that happen?
He told me about it. She took him for a drive and stopped on a lonely road. She said that they were lost, that she had kidnapped him and wouldn't release him. He answered that the ransom she wanted wasn't in circulation. Then She turned to him point blank and says, "What's the use of pretending? I want you and you know it. You don't want me and I know that. But I pay for what I want and I have the price." And he says, "Okay, what is the price?" And she said, "The extension of a certain $10 million which you'll need to save your business. Because if you stay out of the jail as a swindler, it can be only in the custody of Miss Bian Faulkner."
A lie. It's a shameless lie. How can you say those things?
Please, anyone disturbing these proceedings will be asked to leave the courtroom.
What was Mr. Faulkner's answer to that question, Miss Andre?
He said, "It will cost you an awful lot of money." And she answered, "Money has never meant anything to me." Then he said to her, "Will you always remember that it's a business deal and you can't expect it any feeling you are not buying any?" And she says, "I don't need any. You'll have your money and I'll have you." That was the bargain.
Was Mr. Whitfield eager to accept that bargain?
Well, Beyond said that he think Mr. Whitfield will have a stroke when his daughter's decision was announced to him. But Miss Whitfield insisted. Why? Because she always had her way. It was agreed that the loan will be extended and Whitfield will give Beyond unlimited credit.
In other words, Faulkner sold himself as his last security.
Exactly. And like the others, it meant nothing to him.
Did you resent that marriage?
No, I didn't. We had always faced our business as a war, and we both look at this as our hardest campaign.
Why did Mr. Faulkner dismiss you 2 weeks after his wedding?
Well, it's obvious. He was forced to do that. Whitfield refused to advance the money he had promised.
What reason did he offer for that refusal?
The reason that Beyond was keeping a mistress, it was Miss Whitfield's ultimatum. I had to be dismissed.
And did Mr. Whitfield grant that loan after you were dismissed?
No, he granted. He refused it again as well, you know. He attached what he called a slight condition to it.
What was that condition?
He wanted a controlling interest in Beyond's enterprise.
Did Faulkner agree to that?
Well, Beyond said that he'd rather gather all his stock certificates into one pile and strike a match.
And did Mr. Whitfield grant the loan?
No, he granted. Beyond took it.
How did he do that?
By forging Mr. Whitfield's signature on $25 million worth of securities.
How do you know that?
I helped him to do it.
Oh my God. Perfect. Perfect.
Did this help Mr. Faulkner?
Well, only temporarily. Certain payments didn't come due and we couldn't meet them. He had to stretch his credits to the utmost and there was no more to be had.
How did Mr. Faulkner take this situation?
He knew it was the end.
What were his plans?
Well, you don't find men like Beyond Faulkner crying before a bankruptcy commission, and you don't find them looking in jail.
And the alternative?
He was not afraid of the world. He had defied its every law. He was going to leave it when...
I told you to wait for me.
Regan.
Larry, keep quiet, please. Please be quiet. You promised to stay away.
Aaron, you don't understand. You don't understand.
Your honor, I demand that this man not to be allowed to testify.
Why, Miss Andre?
Don't say a word.
Your honor.
Aaron, stop her. For God's sake, stop her. Quiet!
Your Honor, this man loves me. He'll do anything to save me. He lied. Don't believe a word he says.
Karen, your sacrifice is useless. Bjorn Faulkner is dead.
He's dead?
Yes.
Beyond dead?
Didn't you know it, Miss Andre?
Attention. Superior Court number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Wilhelmina Heath presiding.
The people of the state of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I want to report that I have issued a warrant for Reagan's arrest, as he is clearly an accomplice to this murder. But he appears to have disappeared. He was last seen with the defense counsel, and I would like
Keep
to...
your shirt on. Who's disappeared? What do you suppose I appeared for? Just to give you guys a drill? You don't have to issue any warrants. I'll stay here. If she's guilty, I'm guilty.
The defense may proceed.
Karen Andre. Miss Andre, when you first took the stand yesterday, did you know the whole truth about this case?
No.
Do you wish to retract any of your testimony?
No.
When you first took the stand, did you intend to shield anyone?
Yes.
Whom?
Bjorn Faulkner.
Do you still find it necessary to shield him?
No, it's not necessary anymore.
Do you still claim that Bjorn Faulkner committed suicide?
No! Bjorn Faulkner did not commit suicide. He was murdered. I didn't kill him. Please believe me, not for my sake. I don't care what you to do to me now, but because you cannot let his murder remain unpunished. I'll tell you the whole truth. I've lied to the inquest. I've lied to my own attorney. I was going to lie here, but everything I told you so far has been true. I tell you the rest.
When you first took the stand, you had started telling us about Mr. Faulkner's business difficulties, Miss Andre.
I told you he was going to leave the world, but he didn't kill himself. I did throw a man's body off the penthouse, but that body was dead before I threw it, and it wasn't Bjorn Faulkner.
Will you kindly explain that?
Bjorn wanted to be officially dead. No searches or investigation were to bother him. He was to disappear. That suicide was a stage. He had a plan in mind for a long time. In fact, he had kept $10 million off from Whitfield forgery for this. So we needed someone to help us. Someone who could not be connected with Bjorn in any way. There was only one such person, Reagan.
What made you believe that a gentleman such as Reagan would be so willing to help you in such a dangerous undertaking, Miss Andre?
He loved me.
And he agreed to help you in spite of that?
He agreed because of that.
What was the plan?
Reagan was to get a corpse, but he wasn't kill anyone for the purpose. We waited, and on the night of January 16th, Leslie O'Toole, a gunman, was killed by a rival gangsters. His murderer has since been arrested and have confessed, so you can make sure that Reagan had nothing to do with the murder. But you may remember reading in the newspaper that O'Toole's body was disappeared mysteriously from his mother's house, right? That was Reagan's work. O'Toole's height, measurement, and hair was the same as Bjorn's. He was the man I threw off the penthouse.
Was that the extent of Mr. Reagan's help?
No, he was to get an airplane and take Bjorn to South America. Bjorn had never learned to operate a plane, and Reagan used to be a transport pilot. That day, January 16th, Bjorn transferred the $10 million to 3 banks in Buenos Aires in the name of Ragnar Hedin. And then, a month later, I was to meet him at the Hotel Continental in Buenos Aires. Until then, The three of us were not communicating with each other. No matter what happened, we were not to reveal the secret.
Tell us what happened on January 16th, Miss Andre.
Bjorn came to my house that night. I'll never forget his smile when he stepped out of the elevator. He loved danger. We had dinner together, and at 9:30 we went on Reagan's. He had the body dressed in traveling clothes. Then we drove back to my house. Bjorn wanted to be seen entering to the building, so I didn't use my key. I just rang the doorbell. We were dressed formally to make it look like a gay party. Bjorn and Reagan supported the body of he had a drunken friend. Then the night watchman opened the door, and after that, we went up in the elevator.
And then what happened?
Bjorn in chains clothed with the corpse. He brought the letter, and then they carried the body out, leaned against the parapet. And then we said goodbye. Bjorn was to go first, went down in the elevator. I stood and watched the needle of the indicator moving down, 50 floors down. Then it stopped. He was gone.
And then?
Reagan followed him a few minutes later. They were to me 10 miles out of the city where he had the left plane. I stayed alone for an hour. I didn't want to wait out in the garden with the corpse. The dead man that was supposed to be Bjorn. I lie on the bed in my bedroom. I took Bjorn's robe and buried my face in it. I could almost feel the warmth of his body. I waited. And when an hour passed, I knew that the plague had taken off. I got up. I tore my dress to make it look like a struggle. And then I went to the garden, to the parapet. There were so many lights. The world seemed so small, so far away. And then I threw the body over. I watched it fall. And I thought that all Bjorn's troubles went with it. But I didn't know that his life went too.
That is all. Thank you, Miss Andre.
I must confess, Miss Andre, there's not much work for me to be doing here, as you've done all my work for me. Now, tell me, didn't Mr. Faulkner have a clear conception between right and wrong?
Bjorn never thought the things as right or wrong. To him, it was only you can or you can't, and he always could.
And what about you? Did you ever object to helping him with all of these crimes?
To me, it was only he won't or he doesn't.
You said Bjorn Faulkner loved you.
Yes.
Did he ever ask you to marry him?
No. What for?
Don't you know there are laws made for situations such as these?
Laws made by whom, Miss Flint, and for whom?
Didn't your attorney warn you that anything you say here may be held against you?
I'm here to tell the truth.
That you love Bjorn Faulkner?
Yes.
Such as he was?
Because he was as he was.
Exactly. So what would you do if a woman were to take away the man you worshipped so insanely? 'Cause she appealed to his soul, not to his animal desires as you have done so successfully. And she changed him from the ruthless scoundrel you loved into her ideal of an upright man. Would you still love him?
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
No, but I want to answer. I want the district attorney to know that she's insulting beyond Faulkner's memory.
You do. But you thought of nothing by insulting him by having an affair with a gangster while he lived.
You damn low down.
Don't, Larry, don't. You're mistaken, Miss Flint. Reagan loved him. I didn't love him.
He didn't demand the usual price for his help.
He demanded nothing.
You were the only one who knew about Faulkner's crimes.
Yep.
You could have sent him to jail at any point.
I never do that.
But you could if you wanted to.
Suppose so.
Wasn't that the reason for Faulkner's visits after his marriage? He had reformed. He wanted to avoid a crash, but you held it over his head. Wasn't it fear, not love, that kept him in your arms?
Bion never knew the meaning of the word fair.
Who knew about the transfer of $10 million to Buenos Aires?
Bion, Reagan, and myself.
Reagan. Then Faulkner may have had legitimate reasons for that transfer.
I don't know of any.
You mean you won't tell of any? Bjorn Faulkner kept you in luxury for 10 years. You enjoy platinum gowns and other things like that. And you hated to see him turn his fortune over to his investors. You hated to see him poor and change your mode of living, didn't you?
I never was to see him poor.
No, because you and your gangster lover were going to murder him and get the 10 million that nobody knew about.
Your Honor, we object.
Sustained.
You've heard it testified here that Mr. Faulkner had no reason to commit suicide. He had no reason to escape from the first happiness that he had ever known, and you hated him for that happiness, didn't you?
You don't understand Bjorn Faulkner.
Maybe I don't, but let's see if I understand you correctly. You were raped by a man the first day you met him. You lived with him in a brazenly illicit relationship. You held a $25 million forgery. You cultivated a friendship with a notorious gangster. And you defrauded thousands of investors the world over. And you told us this very proudly, flaunting your defiance of common decency. And you don't expect us to believe that you are capable of murder.
You're mistaken again, Miss Flint. I am capable of murder for Bjorn Faulkner's sake.
That is all, Miss Andre.
Lawrence Reagan.
Lawrence Reagan, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Lawrence Reagan.
What is your occupation?
Unemployed.
How long have you known Karen Andre?
5 months.
Where did you meet her?
In Faulkner's office. I went there to do some business with him. I gave up the business because I met his secretary.
How did you happen to become friendly with Miss Andre?
Well, that first meeting weren't exactly friendly. She wouldn't let me in to see Faulkner. She said I had enough money to buy orchids by the pound, and I had no business with her boss. I said, I think it over, and went. I thought it over. Only I didn't think of the business. I thought of her. The next day, I sent her a pound of orchids. Ever see how many that makes? That's how it started.
Did you know of Miss Andre's relations with Mr. Faulkner?
I knew it before I ever saw her. What of it?
You never expected her?
I knew it was hopeless, but I couldn't help it.
You never expected her to share that feeling?
No.
You never made it force upon her?
You have to know all that?
Afraid we do.
I kissed her once. By force. It was the night of Faulkner's wedding. She was alone. She was so unhappy. And I was so crazy about her. She told me it was no use. I never wanted her to know, but she knew. We never mentioned it since.
When did Miss Andre first inform you of Mr. Faulkner's planned escape?
About 2 weeks before we pulled it.
Was Lefty O'Toole one of your men?
No.
Were you connected with the murderers in any way?
No.
In actual fact, you had no definite knowledge of this planned murder.
No, I just had a way of guessing.
What happened on the night of January 16th?
It all happened as Miss Andres told you. But she knows only half the story. I know the rest.
What did you do after you left the penthouse?
I left 10 minutes after Faulkner. He had taken my car. I had one of my men leave another car for me at the door. I stepped on it full speed.
Where did you go?
To Meadow Lane, 10 miles out in Kings County. I'd left my plane there earlier in the evening. Faulkner was to get there first and wait for me.
What time did you get there?
About midnight. It was a bright moon. I turned off the road and I could see tire tracks in the mud where Faulkner's car had passed. I drove out into the lane. Then I thought I'd lost my mind. The plane was gone.
What did you do?
I searched around that lane for 2 hours. Faulkner's car was there, where we'd agreed to hide it. It was empty, lights turned off, the key in the switch. I saw tracks on the ground where the plane had taken off. But Faulkner couldn't fly it himself.
Did you search for any clues to this mystery?
I searched like a bloodhound.
Did you find anything?
I did. One thing. A car.
What kind of car?
It was hidden, deep in the bushes on the other side of the lane. It was a big black sedan.
What did you do?
I wanted to know whose car it was, so I smashed the window, crawled to the back seat, and settled down to wait.
How long did you wait?
The rest of that night.
And then?
Then the owner came back. I saw him coming. His face looked queer. He had no hat. His clothes were wrinkled and grease spotted.
What did you do?
I pretended to be asleep in the back seat. I watched him. He approached, opened the door. Then he saw me. He gave a start and a yell as if he'd been struck in the heart. His nerves must have been jittery.
Then what did you do?
I awakened with a start, stretched, rubbed my eyes and said, "Oh, it's you. Fancy such a meeting." I don't think he liked it. He asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I said, "My name's Guts Reagan. You may have heard it. I was in a little trouble and I had to hide out for a while. And finding this car here was quite a convenience." He said, "That's too bad, but I'll have to ask you to get out. I'm in a hurry."
Did you get out?
No. I stretched and asked, "What's the hurry?" He said, "None of your business." I smiled and explained, "It's not for me. You see, it happens that a certain columnist is a friend of mine. He'd appreciate the story about a gentleman of your prominence found wandering in the wilderness at milkman time. But I'm sure he'd like to have the whole story."
What did the man say?
He said nothing. He took out a checkbook and looked at me. I shrugged, looked at him. Then he said, would $5,000 be a suitable token of appreciation to keep your mouth shut? I said, it'll do. Lawrence Reagan's the name. He wrote out the check. Here it is.
I offered this check in evidence.
What is this nonsense? Who is this man?
Who was this man, Mr. Reagan?
Let the clerk read that check to you.
Kindly read the check.
January 17th. Pay to the order of Lawrence Reagan the sum of $5,000. Signed, John Graham Whitfield.
It's an outrage.
I demand to see that check.
Silence! If there are any more demonstrations of this kind, I shall order my courtroom cleared.
We offered this check in evidence.
Objection!
Objection overruled. Submitted in evidence.
What did you do, Mr. Reagan, when you received this check?
Put it in my pocket and thanked him. Then I drew my gun, stuck it in his ribs, and asked, "Now, you lousy bastard, what did you do with Faulkner?" He opened his mouth like a fish choking and couldn't make a sound.
Your Honor, is this man allowed to make such statements in public in my presence?
The witness is allowed to testify. If it is proved to be perjury, he will suffer the consequences. Proceed, Mr. Stevens.
What did the man answer, Mr. Reagan?
At first he muttered, "I don't know what you're talking about." But I jammed the gun harder and I said, "Cut it out. I've no time to waste. I'm in on it, and so are you. Where did you take him?" He said, "If you kill me, you'll never find out."
Did you get any information out of him?
Not a word. I didn't want to kill him yet. He said, "If you expose me, you'll expose the fake suicide and Faulkner will be found." I asked, "Is he alive?" He said, "Go and ask him." I talked and threatened. It was no use. I let him go. I thought I could always get him.
Did you try to find Faulkner?
I didn't lose a second. I rushed home, changed my clothes, grabbed a sandwich and an airplane and flew to Buenos Aires. I searched. I advertised in the papers. I got no answer. No one called at the banks for Radgar Hayden's millions.
Did you try to communicate this with Miss Andre?
No, we'd promised to stay away from each other for a month. And she'd been arrested for Faulkner's murder. I laughed when I read that. I couldn't say a word, not to betray him, if he were still alive. I waited.
What were you waiting for?
February 16th, at the Hotel Continental. I set my teeth and waited every minute of every hour of that day. He didn't come.
Then?
Then I knew he was dead. I came back to New York. I started a search for my plane. We found it yesterday.
Where did you find it?
In a deserted valley in New Jersey, 100 miles from Meadow Lane. I recognized the plane by the engine number. It had been landed and fire set to it.
Was the plane empty?
No. We found the body of a man in it.
Could you identify him?
No one could. It was nothing but a burned skeleton. But the height was the same. It was Faulkner. I examined the body, or what was left of it. I found 2 bullet holes, one in a rib over the heart, the other straight through the right hand. He didn't die without putting up a fight. He must have been disarmed first, shot through the hand, then murdered, defenseless, straight through the heart.
That is all. Thank you, Mr. Reagan.
Just what is your business, Mr. Reagan?
You'd like me to answer, wouldn't you?
We object, Your Honor. The witness has a right not to answer that question.
Sustained.
Just what do you do when prospective clients refuse to pay you protection?
I'm legally allowed not to understand what you're talking about.
Very well. You don't have to understand. May I question you as to whether you read the newspapers?
You may.
Well,
Question me.
kindly state whether you read the newspapers.
Occasionally.
Well, did you happen to read that when Mr. James Sutton Vance Jr. refused to pay protection to a certain gangster, that his house blew up in an explosion just after the guests left? What was that, Mr. Reagan? Coincidence?
A remarkable coincidence, Miss Flint. Just after the guests left.
Did you happen to read that when Mr. Van Dorn...
We object, Your Honor. Such questions are irrelevant.
Sustained.
So, you had no ill feeling towards Mr. Faulkner for the failure of your business with him?
No.
Mr. Guts, I beg your pardon, Mr. Lawrence Reagan, what would you do if a man were to take a woman, the woman you love so insanely, and rape her?
I'd cut his goddamn throat with a dull saw.
You would? And you expect us to believe that you, Gus Reagan, gangster, outlaw, scum of the underworld, would move aside and make such a grand gesture as to throw the woman you loved into another man's arms?
Your Honor,
I loved her.
Why did you allow Faulkner's visits after the marriage?
I had nothing to say about that.
Really? You guys didn't hold a blackmail plot over his head?
Got any proof of that?
Her association with you was the best proof.
Objection.
Sustained.
How did you kill Mr. Faulkner in the penthouse that night?
Objection.
Sustained.
Where is your accomplice, the man that played the drunk?
I can give you his exact address. Evergreen Cemetery. Whitfield Family Memorial, which is the swankiest place Poor Lefty's ever been.
So, you're telling us that the body in Evergreen Cemetery is Lefty O'Toole, and the body found on the burned on the plane is Bjorn Faulkner?
Yes.
And what is to prove it's not the other way around? That you didn't steal O'Toole's body? What's the proof that you didn't stage this fantastic thing yourself? That you didn't plant the airplane and body in New Jersey and then appear with that wild story in an attempt to save your mistress? We heard her testify that you would do anything for her, that you would lie for her.
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Where is your real proof, Mr. Reagan?
Miss Flint, you're a district attorney and well, you know what I am. We both have a lot of dirty work to do. Such happens to be life, or most of it. But you think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.
That is all, Mr. Reagan.
John Graham Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, where were you on January 16th?
I believe I was in New York City on business that night.
Do you have any witnesses to prove it?
Mr. Stevens, you must realize I am not in the habit of making alibis for myself. I've had no reason to keep track of my activities and secure any witnesses. Couldn't find him now if I could.
Mr. Whitfield, how many cars do you own?
4.
What are they?
Well, let me tell you, one of them is a black sedan, as you're so anxious to learn. May I remind you that it's not the only black sedan in New York City.
You've just flown back from California by plane.
Yes.
You flew it yourself?
Yes.
You're a licensed pilot then?
I am.
Now, that story about Mr. Reagan is a lie in your opinion.
It is.
Then, Mr. Whitfield, who wrote that $5,000 check?
I did.
Will you kindly explain it?
Oh, it's very simple. We all know Mr. Reagan's profession. He had threatened to kidnap my daughter, and I preferred to pay him off rather than to take any chances on her life.
Now, the check is dated the 17th of January. That same day, you announced an offer for the arrest of Mr. Reagan.
Yes. But you realize that besides my civic duty, I also had my daughter's safety in mind, and I wanted prompt action.
Mr. Whitfield, your personal fortune and your daughter are your prized possessions, aren't they?
They are.
Then, what would you do to the man who took your money and deserted your daughter for another woman?
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
You hated Faulkner. You did everything to break him. You knew of his stunt in relation to that suicide. Mr. Youngquist's own words to you prove it, didn't you?
I suspected nothing of the kind.
And on January 16th, you spent the whole day watching Faulkner.
Certainly not.
Weren't you trailing Faulkner in your black sedan? Didn't you follow him as soon as he left the penthouse that night?
Fantastic. How could I have recognized him, supposing it were Faulkner leaving? Van Fleet, the detective, he didn't.
Van Fleet wasn't watching for a trick. He had no suspicion of the plot. You had.
Oh, my dear Mr. Stevens, again, how could I have known anything about the plot for that night?
Didn't you have any particular information about Faulkner's activities at that time?
None.
You knew of nothing unusual that day?
Not a thing.
For instance, you didn't hear that he transferred $10 million to Buenos Aires.
I never heard of it.
I killed him! I killed Bjorn Faulkner. It was Whitfield. I helped him to kill him. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. What? I don't know. I've helped him to kill Faulkner. He knew about the 10 million because I told him.
Now look here, my man, you can't just...
Oh, Mr. Whitfield, thank you.
No questions.
Mr. Youngquist, can you answer some more questions, please? You told Mr. Whitfield about that transfer.
He told me many times about the 10 million that was spent, and I told him before I didn't know if it was a secret. I didn't know if it was a secret. That day, I told him at noon about Boris Aris, about the 10 million that day on January the 16th.
What kind of frame-up is this?
You told Whitfield at noon.
I did. I did. I would give my life to hear beyond Wagner. And I helped him to kill him.
That is all, Mr. Youngquist. Thank you.
Mr. Youngquist, were you alone with Mr. Whitfield when you told him?
Yes.
Therefore, it's your word against Mr. Whitfield's.
Yes.
That is all, Mr. Youngquist.
The defense rests, Your Honor.
Any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
The defense may proceed with the closing argument.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are here to decide the fate of a woman. But there is much more than one woman here on trial. Before you pronounce your verdict on Karen Andre, think of your verdict on Bjorn Faulkner. Do you believe that Bjorn Faulkner was the kind of man who would bow, renounce, repent? If you do, then she, Karen Andre, is guilty. But if you believe that in this sad, half-hearted world of ours, that a man can still be born with life singing in his veins, a scoundrel, a swindler, a criminal, call him anything but still a conqueror. If you value a strength that is its own motor, an audacity that is its own law, a spirit that is its own vindication, if you are still able to admire a man that no matter how many mistakes he may have made in form, he never betrayed his essence, his self-esteem. If you feel from the bottom of your hearts that you felt a longing for a hunger, for a greatness where your lives and the lives beyond you are such. If you've known a hunger which great timidity can't satisfy, you'll understand Bjorn Faulkner. If you do, you'll understand the woman who was his priestess. Who is on trial in this case? Karen Andre? No. It's you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who are here on trial. It is your own souls that will be brought to light when your decision is rendered.
The district attorney may now conclude the case.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for once I agree with the defense counsel. Two different types of humanity are opposed here. And your verdict will depend on which side you choose to believe. You are asked by the Defence Counsel to take the side of a swindler, harlot, a gangster, against the side of a man who has the perfect example of social responsibility, and a woman who is the ideal version of womanhood, has been for centuries. On one side, you see a life of service, duty, unselfishness. On the other, a steamroller of sensual indulgence and egoistic ambition. I agree with the Defence Counsel that the judgment in this case will be passed deep within your own souls. If you believe that man is here for a purpose higher than his own enjoyment, if you believe that love is not just in the bedroom, but in the kitchen, in the parlor, in the nursery, if you believe the cozy fireside of a home is the highest a man can aspire to, you will believe that simple virtue is higher than arrogance, and a man like Bjorn Faulkner should be brought to bow before its very presence. Let your verdict tell us that no one shall raise his head too high in defiance of our common standards.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I shall ask you to consider your verdict carefully. You are to determine whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty of the murder of Bjorn Faulkner.
I found a body mangled to an extreme degree.
Well, he was a bit tight, ma'am, if I'm permitted to say so. He wasn't very steady on his feet, so that Mr. Faulkner and the other gentleman had to help him. They almost dragged him into the elevator.
She's hoisting a man's body up onto the parapet. A man in formal evening clothes. It's Faulkner. He's unconscious. There's no resistance. She pushes him with all her strength. Body goes out over the edge of the parapet, down into space.
I found only two enjoyable things on this earth whose every door was open to me: my whip over the world and Karen Andre.
He had a platinum dress made for her. He would make a fire in the fireplace and heat the dress and then put it on her. And she would ask to put it on as hot as she could stand it. And if it burned her shameless skin, she'd laugh like the pagan she is.
I had to have a modest little home with a bright kitchen and a little flower garden. We'd be so happy there, just the two of us, until we had little ones to take care of.
But I had full confidence of my business acumen that would have led to prevent the crash had Mr. Faulkner lived.
It is not probable, but it is possible.
And then here Faulkner just said, "Oh, I'll commit suicide." And then here Whitford, he just coldly said, "If you do that, be sure to do a good job at it."
Bjorn never thought the things as right or wrong. To him, it was only you can or you can't, and he always could. To me, was only, he won't or he doesn't.
But you think we're both so low that if something passes us to which one kneels, we no longer have eyes to see it? I loved her. She loved Faulkner. That's our only proof.
Get ready to give your verdict. You will be asked to choose whether Karen Andre is guilty or not guilty. You must click on one of these to watch the ending. Click guilty or not guilty now. The link is also in the description below.